I was teaching a retreat last week at Big Bear. 4 feet of snow in 3 days. It was a thing. Um, but there were a couple of things that came up, a couple of teachings, topics, thoughts that kind of came up during the weekend. And it was, I've been sitting with them ever since. I've been reflecting on them. And so I want to talk about them this evening. And the first one was this idea of distraction, how easily the mind becomes distracted. And I think one of the reason that came up, as I mentioned, there was all this snow last week, and it was very easy to be distracted by A, all the snow, but B, the fear that comes up and the what's going to happen 4 days from now, are we going to be able to get out? And so the mind is easily distracted. And I even had an experience around that. Found myself about, am I going to be able to drive down and blah, blah, blah. It's not my favorite. Driving windy mountain roads is not my favorite thing, even in July. So the thought of the snow was kind of really taking me away from what the experience of the moment was. And so the practice was to come back, come back, come back. And distraction is what happens all the time while we're sitting. And, we're distracted by a sound or smell or a thought. And so it's really important to understand distraction and to maybe perhaps look at it a little more closely. And so I always like to see what the Buddha may have said about different things that pop into my head. Lots of times there's nothing because it's just my head, but sometimes there is. And there are a couple of, at least the words that are like, for in this instance, that are translated as distraction. And there are a couple of lines, there are a couple of lines from the Dhammapada, which is a collection of kind of couplets, really famous collection of couplets of the Buddha. And there are two, and it says, just as a raging flood sweeps away a sleeping village, so does death claim a man of distracted mind, as he continually seeks more and more of life's fleeting pleasures. Death drowns the unsatisfied man whose restless mind clutches for greater and greater pleasures. And I don't think it means that you are going to be killed because you have a distracted mind, but you are dead to this invitation to awakening because you're so caught up. You're chasing, is in the Dhammapada says, you're chasing pleasure, you're chasing the shiny objects, you're chasing, what you want. If it's unpleasant, you're chasing the pleasant. And we find that in our experiences. It's like, I want what's over there. The grass may be greener over there. I'm going over there. And so it's really important to recognize that distraction, because it's really uncomfortable when we're dissatisfied with this moment, or we're pulled in so many different directions. And what came up a lot again, that this, when thinking about this idea of distraction, is that many of you, or some of you, may remember that movie Up, that animated movie. And in the movie there was a dog, and the dog was like, really focused on something, and then all of a sudden he's like, squirrel, he's off somewhere else. And that is such a beautiful description of what happens. Our mind is oh, there's a sound, or there's this, and then something shows up. It's like, oh, I want that, or I'm going over there. And this practice is about coming back, because when we're distracted, we're swept away, and we're unclear. We're caught up in what we think is happening rather than what is happening. And we're easily distracted by all the senses. In Buddhism, there's the regular five senses that we talk about: sight, smell, taste, touch, sound, but also thought. We're distracted by thought. And I know have all had this experience where this thought comes up and down you go. It's like, today's Sunday evening, and Monday, all of a sudden the thing, oh, I have to do that thing before tomorrow morning, or oh, I have that meeting tomorrow, or oh, and you're down that path. So this practice is come back, come back, come back. And And what another thing that's kind of tied to this distraction piece, and sometimes it's why we're so distraction, is this idea of habit energy. These Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this a lot, and I talk about it sometimes. These implicit biases that we have, we're kind of uh, attuned to go in particular directions. It's the habit of mind. I talk about that too, the habit of mind, those neural pathways that we have created throughout our lifetime, whether we're aware of it or not. There's these things, these directions that we always seem to find ourselves in. And what Thich Nhat Hanh says about it is that our joy, peace, and happiness depend very much on our practice of recognizing and transforming these habit energies. There are positive habit energies that we have to cultivate, like staying present or coming back to the moment when we find ourselves lost, or be willing to let go of things that aren't helpful. And there are negative habit energies that we have to recognize, embrace, and say, yep, this is true, and transform as well. You know? And the energy with which we do this is mindfulness. It takes mindfulness. It takes this willingness to be present and this willingness to not be distracted, because I'm sure each of you have had that experience. I know I have had it, where some old habit energy comes up, like this well-worn storyline. Used to have this habit of self-pity. It was a very comfortable place to be. Oh, poor me. Oh, it was warm, and I used to go there a lot. And then the recognition of starting to go down that pathway and go, oh, this doesn't go anywhere. Maybe I just won't go there. We have the capacity to let go of those habit energies, but it takes a recognition of them and a willingness to let go, and a cultivation of mindfulness, which is what we're all doing here when we sit and we practice. We're recognizing these stories that show up. I think one of the, for me, one of the, a real, I can't even think of a word, a real in my face recognition of this distraction and a habit energy is something as simple as I remember doing yoga one time, and we were doing balancing, just a simple balance, like lifting one leg up and standing on the other one, not even very fancy, and doing it. And then all of a sudden my mind started drifting away and I fell over because the mindfulness was gone. Back in the day, I don't know if many of you had this experience, they would tell you for posture, walk with a book on your head. That takes a lot of mindfulness. Even walking from one room to the other with a full cup of coffee, that takes mindfulness, because if you're not paying attention, you can just be sloshing your hands. So these are tangible examples of what can happen when you're not paying attention and when you're distracted and pulled, those habits of mind that just take you away. And instead to cultivate this different way of being present, being mindful. Thich Nhat Hanh also says that this energy has been transmitted to us by many generations of ancestors. So it's like kind of almost in our DNA. And we continue to cultivate it. We were taught these things. We were given these messages that were passed down to us, whether verbally or seeing people's behavior, seeing how folks treated each other, how people deal with different emotions in our families. Those different things are passed down. And so this energy has been passed down by generations, and we continue to cultivate it if we don't pay attention. It's really, really powerful. And we're intelligent enough to know that if we say this or do that, we'll damage, let's say, a relationship. Yet when the time comes, we say it or do it anyway. Why? because the habit energy is stronger than we are, and it's pushing us all the time. And this practice aims at liberating ourselves from that kind of habit energy. You know, it's this well-worn pathway that we don't even question. I was thinking again about the last week on the retreat. We had, because there was so much snow, we had these well-worn pathways. There was the path from the sitting hall to the dining room to our cabins, and that was a positive pathway because you wanted to stay on that. You didn't want to drift off. But perhaps there was a pathway taking you off somewhere else. You want to pay attention. You had to pay attention. Is this the right way? Is this the less right way? Is this, I love the term that's used so often in Buddhism is wholesome or unwholesome. And it doesn't mean it's like nourishing or not nourishing, skillful or not skillful, wise or unwise. So there's no judgment around it. It's just like, you know what? If you walk this way, you're walking towards liberation. If you walk this way, you're walking towards more suffering, more discomfort, this trapped in that samsara, that distraction that happens over and over again. And our habit energies show up in different ways for each of us. We all have different habit energies. It has us keep our mouths shut when perhaps we should speak up because of whatever's underneath this really deep experience that we've had that's pushed us in a particular direction. Or we speak when we shouldn't. You know, when am I going to learn to keep my mouth shut? I don't know. I keep speaking up. Or we run away when we should stay. Or we stay when we should run away or leave. You know, we react inappropriately. We do things we don't want to do. We're dismissive, we're fearful, we're angry. There's a story that I've told a few times that I find to be an extremely powerful example of this. And it's about a man, Claude Anshin Thomas, who is a Zen monk. And he is American. He's a Vietnam vet. And he had an experience, a lot of awful experiences in Vietnam. But after he came back from Vietnam, he was quite a mess. And there was, at some point, it was suggested he connect or go on retreat or something with Thich Nhat Hanh. And he thought that was extraordinary to spend all this time seeing Vietnamese only as the enemy and then go to a group of Vietnamese teachers to find some ease, to find a path away from his suffering. And he talks about how he had this one experience in Vietnam that was so awful that he and his platoon, I think it was, walked into a village and there were some children, babies crying, and right at the same time there were those babies crying, there was this huge explosion and a lot of people were killed, a lot of his platoon was killed, a lot of villagers were killed, and it was this really awful incident. And he says, this incident had been so overwhelming that my conscious mind could not hold it. And so this memory had remained inaccessible to me until that evening in 1990 when he met Thich Nhat Hanh. As I sat there looking at this monk, Vietnam just came rushing back to me, all the unaddressed, repressed thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. You know, I understood for the first time how the war had taken away my ability to have relationships. I had left my 3-year-old son and his mother, not because I couldn't stand to be with them, which is what my suffering was telling me, but because I couldn't stand to be in my own skin. So we have these experiences and we push them down because they are unbearable. They're so painful, but they create the atmosphere in which we live. And there's a quote from another book called Deep Diversity. And it says emotions exist at an overt and a covert level. When we get angry, happy, sad, etc., the emotion has to break our personal threshold before we can become aware of experiencing it. They are unconscious before the threshold is reached. Without full awareness, emotions influence our behavior, thoughts, and choices. If we're not paying attention, all this stuff influences our behavior. It's like Claude Anshin Thomas left his wife and child because he just couldn't deal with this deep, the children crying and all that pain that was so deeply buried. And it happens a lot of times when we sit on the cushion. When I do intro to meditation classes, so many folks come and say, I'm looking for bliss. And maybe at some point there's bliss, but each of you know that when you sit and you close your eyes, a lot of times all that stuff comes because the distractions are gone. And so how do we hold all those things that come up? Or even just one thing that comes up? But the thing of it is that, a lot of times people get up and leave. You see, there's not a million people coming to this class every week. And if you've been coming to Sangha for any time, you see people come in and go and go and come because it can become uncomfortable. And this practice asks us to sit with the discomfort, which is why in early meditation practice, you learn to recognize when something is pleasant or unpleasant, and if your foot falls asleep, don't just move. Can you be with it? If there's an itch, can you be with it? This simple teaching of being with discomfort of the body, like an ache or a loud noise or some annoying sound or smell, can you be with that? That's little, because we're also being asked to be with these deep emotional things that we need to deal with, because if not, we're going to continually repeat these things that we don't know why we're repeating. Run when we shouldn't, when we should stay, or stay when we should go. It's funny, even Bruce Springsteen talks about this. He wrote a memoir a few years ago, which I listened to when I was driving a lot. And he said, as we age, the weight of our unsorted baggage becomes heavier, much heavier. With each passing year, the price of our refusal to do that sorting rises higher and higher. It becomes more and more overwhelming. It wears us down when we are unable to sit. And we find more and more distractions, some of which may be not so harmful, some of which may be destructive. We're always chasing the shiny stuff. So the question is, or one of the questions is, are you willing to sit with the discomfort? Or are you so stuck in the habit that you're willing to stay in the dukkha, the discomfort? And there's no judgment in this question. It's a huge question, but there's no judgment in it, because, these habit energies are not our fault. I mean, they're results of experiences of our lives. But what we do with them is our responsibility. That's what we have to recognize. Sometimes we even get something out of them. Even though we know this is not a good thing, it's really difficult to let go. And it's funny, I found a thing in Joseph Goldstein's book, Mindfulness, where he talks about this. And he quotes a Stephen Mitchell in his book, Parables and Portraits, and talks about these habits as his lines about Sisyphus. Sisyphus is that person who is condemned by the gods to push a rock uphill for all eternity, which is annoying. And he says, we tend to think of Sisyphus as a tragic hero condemned by the gods to shoulder his rock sweatily up the mountain and again up the mountain forever. The truth is that Sisyphus is in love with the rock. He cherishes every roughness and every ounce of it. He talks to it, sings to it. It has become the mysterious other. He even dreams of it as he sleepwalks upward. Life is unimaginable without it, looming always above him like a huge gray moon. He doesn't realize that at any moment he is permitted to step aside, let the rock hurtle to the bottom, and go home. Tragedy is the inertial force of the mind. This letting the mind dictate. You have to do it this way. You've always done it this way. Or this is who I am. I can't help it. We get that, like I mentioned, self-pity. That wallowing self-pity it was warm. It was comfortable. It was miserable, but it was familiar. And it fed something. It fed something. So if we have these habit energies that we begin to uncover and recognize, we also have to ask ourselves, as I said, are we willing to let go? You know? We hold on to stuff even though we know it's not helpful because it's all we do know, and it's terrifying to imagine what it would be like without it. That's a big deal. I've heard a lot of people talk, and I've had these conversations with people who say, if I let this go, then what? Because Buddhism kind of pulls the rug out from under you and says, this, what you think may not be so. No, the bunch of conditioning that kind of landed you where you are, but there's an opportunity to move in a different direction, letting go of those cherished ideas. Cherished not because they're so wonderful, but because they're what we have. You know? But it can be scary to let go. It can be scary to let go. So what is helpful is the teaching I have found is the teaching around renunciation. And renunciation in Buddhism is basically recognizing what causes us this suffering, causes this comfort, is this busyness, perhaps, whatever. And this invitation is to let go. That's what renunciation is. Let go of what causes suffering, causes dissatisfaction, discomfort, unease, unhappiness. Not just letting it go, because you can't just go into that. Because if you feel something, but Vincent talks about when you are willing to let something go, you want to imagine you. What would
Mary, I
be
think
more
you're breaking up.
If you want to, okay, I will turn my video off and see if that helps. Does that help at all? A little bit. Okay. If not, I'll move to another room. In fact, let me go there anyway. So if you're letting go of something, what are you going to put in its place? So I was saying, if you have that awful, harsh, let's say, self-judging, self-loathing that you're so stupid, you'll never amount to anything. What's wrong with you? I don't know if any of you can relate to any of these, this harsh self-talk. Be willing to let that, I'm just using that as an example. If you want that habit energy of this awful talk, Be willing to let it go, and what will you put in its place? What would you like to experience instead? Saying no to what's unskillful and moving in a direction, intention, because renunciation is part of wise intention in the Eightfold Path. So begin to move away from suffering and towards what serves you better. So instead of saying you're stupid, say, oh, you just don't have the information right now, or something like that. You know, begin to recognize if you can't speak, if you need to, practice saying things that are difficult to say, or practice staying when you usually run. It's, again, this practice is an embodied practice. When you have that habit energy that starts showing up, I bet you if you pay attention, it shows up in the body, which is why there's so much emphasis on uh, being connected to the body, or recognizing what's present in the body. Where do these habit energies show up? And if you start working against your habit energy, it's really going to ramp up in the body. Maybe the belly gets all knotted up, or the jaw gets tight, or your fist ball up, or your shoulders are around your ears. Begin to recognize how those habit energies show up in your body, and tend to those instead of the story. Tend to the experience of the body. Begin to soften. This is also part of wise intention. It's compassion, it's goodwill, it's renunciation. Tend to that, soften to that challenging experience of doing something different, of letting the rock go, to use that Sisyphus example again. Breathing into the challenge, breathing into the challenge, and do something different. My one thing that for me was of saying things that need to be said when I knew the person didn't want to hear it, or I was afraid the person didn't want to hear it. So I would practice, and I would feel that tightness in my belly, and I wanted to shift the habit energy. I wanted to say what I needed to say, because it was so painful to keep my mouth shut. I'd kept my mouth shut for so many years, and I needed to begin to speak. And so I remember this one of these first times doing it, and just being so constricted and tight, but doing it anyway. Being, breathing this gentleness, not giving play to the thing that says, get out of here, but instead giving play to the thing that says, stay, and say it. That is the practice of moving away from these habit energies that are so deeply embedded and can be so painful. We use our practice. We use mindfulness. We use this effort, this willingness. We use the investigation, which is this simply letting and not figuring stuff out, but what is this right now? Is this wise and skillful, or is this taking me away, taking me towards more discomfort? And we can't always figure it all out on our own, which is why sangha and the company of wise friends is really important. Folks who have been down this path have this experience that we can share with, and say, hey, what do you think about this? Can I talk to you for a few minutes? Which is what's beautiful about sangha. And it's also the beauty of retreat or extended practice, even just a day or half a day. It gives us the opportunity to slow down and begin to recognize these energies and become familiar with them. Although I bet if you thought about it, you could probably name a habit energy of yours that gets in the way, those old, well-worn pathways. And the good news is that there is an opportunity to create a new neural pathway and walk in a new direction. You know? Even if we don't know what it's like, all we have is the next step. We don't have to see the whole path out in front of us, just the next step. And then when we take that step, then the next step. And then maybe even finding some ease underneath that, which recognizing that it doesn't all have to be peaches and cream or lollipops and rainbows for us to be at ease. We can be at ease even with discomfort. Right now, it's like this. Right now, it's like this. So thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, my friends. I appreciate your kind attention, and I'm happy to hear any thoughts you might have, how your habit energies show up, how you've worked with them, or how you have battled with them, or have you, whatever your experience is, or about anything. So thanks. I'll put my video on just see how that goes now. Any thoughts? Well, I invite you to spend some time reflecting on your those habit energies that impact you. Some positive, like Thich Nhat Hanh said, they're not all unskillful or unwise. There are also positive ones. I think sometimes Buddhism gets the rap of only pointing to the negative, suffering, 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 which makes sense because we do so much of that, but also to recognize the beneficial aspect. That's like recognizing when there's some ease, recognizing when, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm shifted into another thing. And yeah, it's there's so much liberation when you can recognize how things are wholesome or skillful or wise, or you're connected. And connect with that, somatically as well. There's so much wisdom in that. We have to recognize the good just as much as we recognize the bad. So I invite you to do that. It's a worthy exercise. And I also, I'm gonna, Adrian mentioned the retreat. I'm excited that we're gonna have this. It's gonna be the end of May, so there shouldn't be any snow. Because I don't ever want to do. It was a wonderful experience, but I really don't want to do that again. Um, and that is a beautiful, and it's pretty much it's an ICD retreat. So it'll be for the folks from this community. And Ian Jokai and I will be teaching, and that, as I mentioned, is a beautiful time to be to allow the mind to still and really connect with these things that we often don't have time in our daily lives because there's so much going on, and we don't have that opportunity. So yeah, we'll have more information on that in the next weeks, but it is that the end of May. And Adrian also mentioned the opportunity for volunteering, being of service in the community, Zoom helpers. Yeah, if you got on to this group tonight, then you could probably host a Zoom call. So it really is. Zoom makes it so easy. So we can use the support, and then again, your financial support is very welcome to support us as we move through 2023. And I think that's it. So let's just sit for a minute. Take a couple of breaths. Just let yourself relax, feeling into the body, feeling any sensations that are here. Letting yourself settle. remembering that just as we practice for our own benefit, we practice for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free. Thank you, thank you, thank you, my friends. Thanks for being here. It was lovely to see you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care of each other. Much
Thank
love.
you.